Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. We're here today on the lovely Appledore Island in Maine. My name is Asha Myers, and this is the Art of Research podcast. We have a guest researcher here with us today. Do you mind giving us an introduction?
Sure, yeah. My name's Noah Milski. I go to Colby College. I'm going to be a rising junior. And I am currently a SURGE, which stands for Shoals Undergraduate Research Group. And I'm particularly looking at seabird ecology research on Appledore Island.
Seabird research. Is there any specific seabird that you're looking at?
Yes, I am particularly interested in the black guillemot, which is an alcid, so it's the same family as puffins. They're medium-sized seabirds, and they like to hide their nests in rock crevices along the shorelines of these isles of shoals. They're pretty interesting birds. They can dive up to actually 160 feet deep, and they feed on benthic or bottom-dwelling fish species.
Wow. And how did you become interested in this bird species? Was there other research that inspired you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually hadn't really heard about the species before I got to Appledore. When I got here, I was looking at the different seabirds on this island. There's a bunch of them between like gulls and terns and wading birds like egrets. And so I was really trying to pick a study organism that I could get a sufficient amount of data on, so that was a big factor. But I was also very influenced by the previous intern who was here over on the neighboring island of Appledore. And they had worked on black guillemots previously and showed us around the island and showed us some of those nest sites. And I was really interested when we entered one of those nesting neighborhoods, is what we call a group of guillemot nests all in the same area. All of the guillemots would fly out of their nests and head straight for the water, and you just see a bunch of them flying out toward the water. And I was like, wow, like it's an interesting how they're such size species compared to the gulls, who will literally try to attack you when you get to near their nest. And so that would really spiked my interest, and so I was like started thinking about questions related to their shyness.
So, jumping off of that, do you mind explaining your research briefly?
Yeah, so this summer I'm particularly interested in how investigator disturbance impacts the breeding success of black guillemots on the Isles of Shoals. And so a lot of times when we're collecting samples as ecologists, we have to go in and find those individuals and handle them or observe them to collect data on growth rates or behaviors, like feeding behaviors. And so that can have potential effects on the individual you're trying to study. And so I'm very curious on if those effects have an impact on the body condition of the bird as well as the feeding frequencies of the chicks.
So that's a really interesting question because it raises another question of what research gets done with the birds. Like, what is the significance of the research that people have been doing on the island in the past?
Yeah, so what's interesting about this population of black guillemots is it's actually the southernmost breeding population in the world. And so because they're so far south, it's a really unique population to do some research on, especially as we've been documenting the effects of climate change on a lot of organisms. This could be a particular site to look at how they're responding to those climate changes, but also just keeping a long-term monitoring project of this species. It's interesting to look at this population over time to assess those changes in the population, and then from there, if the population starts becoming threatened, we can use those changes to inform conservation and management decisions.
So there is this important significance of the birds and their location in Maine and this specific population. So going off of that, what have you found? What has your research discovered about the impacts on these nesting neighborhoods, did you say it was called? That's adorable. That's so cute.
Yeah. So the main takeaway of my research is that the specific handling of these birds, so we would go out to specific neighborhoods and try to sample individuals and collect a bunch of different data, things like the body weight and the wing length, and as well as the time spent at each nest. And so after collecting all of this data, we basically found that the handling of these chicks, the cumulative handling time, had no significant effect on the body condition of the chicks, meaning that the more you handle them, does not actually impact the weights of these birds. So they still are consistently weighing the same and have similar body conditions between my high disturbance group, where I would visit more frequently and try to handle them more often, compared to that low disturbance group where we were only handling them to get a final terminal measurement and visiting less frequently.
So that data indicates that the disruptions are not having a statistically significant effect. Are there any other concerns with the population, or would you say that that's indicative that the research is not disruptive, that there isn't any sort of ethical concern with the interactions with these animals?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually found a lot of support of those results in other studies that looked at similar effects of investigator disturbance on reproductive success of different seabirds, things like multiple penguin species and petrels, as well as the very similar species, the puffin. So we are seeing a lot of supporting results that investigator disturbance is not having a significant effect on the chick quality of seabirds. However, there are a lot of other factors that you can look at. So we were only looking at how investigator disturbance impacts the nestling period, when the chicks are born and are growing. But I think it would be particularly interesting to look at how investigator disturbance impacts the incubation period of these birds. So maybe if you disturb them more during that early stage of incubation, there's going to lead to higher nest abandonments or less reoccupancy those following years. And so that might actually have a more impactful effect on the breeding success of these birds compared to the disturbances when the chicks are alive.
Wow. Thank you so much, Noah. That's great information. Really, really insightful. Thank you so much, and have a nice night.